We don't mind having and bearing sanctions banning us from Europe. We are not Europeans. We have not asked for any inch of Europe, or any square inch of that territory. So, Blair, keep your England and let me keep my Zimbabwe.
These were the famous words of former Zimbabwean President Robert Mugabe that reverberated across the walls of the 2002 Earth Summit held in Johannesburg and continue to be etched in history. Sanctions were a culmination of allegations of grand corruption by the country's leaders, a controversial land reform program, disputed elections, and reported human rights abuses. Zimbabwe's economy would then go into freefall with a weakened Zim dollar, crippled institutions, and its citizens heading for the borders in search of a better quality of life.
In Zimbabwe, the sanctions were targeted against individuals, but naturally what they end up doing is that because of over-regulation by international institutions, they end up affecting other people that are not related to those individuals and other institutions that are not related to those individuals.
More than 2 decades later, the land question, which thrust the former breadbasket of Africa into the spotlight, has now also seen South Africa placed under the global lens. Misinformation behind the newly signed Expropriation Act has seen the U.S. issue an executive order withdrawing foreign aid from South Africa on the basis of a false claim that land was being grabbed from white South African farmers. For some, the question is whether this is a precursor to the devastation suffered in Zimbabwe.
Well, in my view, the two situations can't be compared. Zimbabwe had 21 years of different forms of U.S. sanctions that was lifted in 2024. They still have a special type of U.S. sanction called Global Magnitsky sanctions. And these Global Magnitsky sanctions, in the case of Zimbabwe, are still in place in respect of the president of the country, Emerson Mnangagwa, and his wife Auxilia, and about 10 other powerful officials. And these sanctions are in place against these individuals for their involvement in corruption or serious human rights abuse. So these are special case sanctions, and I do not see this happening in South Africa.
That the removal of aid is not considered a sanction, but rather is simply a voluntary arrangement or decision to help or not help another country or people in another country. Chinona, however, contends that it is a sanction, but charges that it would not produce a quote-unquote Zimbabwe 2.0.
I think both of them, the South African scenario and the Zimbabwean scenario, are all sanctions. Donald Trump sanctioned South Africa by denying it aid. It's a sanction. But the sanctions are different in that the sanctions against South Africa will never make South Africa a Zimbabwe. Zimbabwe is a basket case today because of the inability to run the country, the cluelessness, incompetence, and more importantly, the grand looting of public funds, the corruption that the whole world has now come to know Zimbabwe of. That's what destroyed Zimbabwe.
But Zimbabwean businessman Chester Mende, who has lived through the chaos of the targeted sanctions, begs to differ.
You look at, most of our banks in Zimbabwe, targeted or not, they are struggling to get lines of credit. Now, I'm not sure if that is what you call targeted sanctions. Why are they not able to get lines of credit? They're obviously not able to get lines of credit because your country is blacklisted. So if the country is blacklisted, is it the leaders that are blacklisted? I would argue not.
While economists argue that fears of a Zimbabwe 2.0 are without merit, and the focus should be on ensuring that South Africa does not lose its AGOA benefits.
We have to look at our AGOA benefits, which we might lose, which will be a severe blow to our agricultural exports to the US and to our vehicle manufacturing exports to the US. It will be a severe blow and will unfortunately have very negative knock-on effects in South Africa in terms of employment.
Mende, however, contends that the current developments are essentially an omen of the bleak future South Africans can expect.
Without a shadow of doubt, you're going to see this happening, and the quality of your life for the everyday South African is going to reduce. The cost of your commodities, of whatever nature, your groceries, is going to increase. Watch the space in the next 12 months or so. You better be ready for it because it's a painful situation.
Canny Maphanga, SABC News, Johannesburg.